In 2125, for years after the emergence of the four colossal towers of nothingness, four gods of destruction appeared in the world with terrifying powers. Each of them led numerous monstrous creatures, spreading chaos across the land. People referred to them as natural disasters. To survive and continue human civilization, the strongest representatives of humanity known as apostles decided to unite and launch a tragic counterattack against one of the four natural disasters. In a Japanese institution, one of the warriors plunged a sharp sword into the chest of the female warrior, saying that victory had come at the cost of countless sacrifices among the apostles. However, they managed to overcome one of the four natural disasters. Suddenly, a girl behind the warrior shouted at him. He turned to see the girl named Mem swinging her leg and head to attack him. He looked at her with a questioning expression and wondered if she was Mem. He easily caught her and looked into her eyes with a smile, saying that kicking someone is a disease that needs to be treated. She shouted back angrily, her face red with fury, saying how many times she had to tell him not to get into trouble during the battle. He was an agile assassin, not a powerful warrior. Besides, she didn't allow him to call her by her first name. Her name was Molly, part of the word moly, and the subsequent part, li, was from there. He bent down, holding his knees to catch his breath, and told her that he knew she was very worried about him. She averted her gaze and replied seriously that she wasn't worried about him. He shouldn't exaggerate. She just didn't want to carry his corpse later. She approached him, took out a handkerchief, and wiped his face, saying that reinforcements were about to arrive, and he would become a hero by defeating one of the four celestial disasters. A hero shouldn't appear dirty at this moment. Both of them were suddenly pierced by a sharp weapon, blood spouting from the attackers. Ellen's face was filled with terror as he stood stunned by what had happened and the incredible pain he felt. He realized that Zahn was in front of him. Molly was also shocked by the sharp pain, and Enel asked why he had done it. They weren't best friends. He pulled out the sword, and the boys fell to the ground, dazed. He laughed loudly and asked again if friends were necessary for betrayal. He stood in front of them with an arrogant expression and a smile on his face, saying that he had stolen exactly what should be his. The hero who killed the natural disaster should be him, and he was a genius. Molly fell onto Yilan's body and was already unconscious, while Yilan's eyes remained open, trying to catch his breath. Yenbi threw his sword onto their bodies and shouted once more that he would replace them as the hero and become the betrayer who killed Muley. Een could only express his terror on his face and screamed loudly. At that moment, many beams of light formed around his body, and he found himself in an office with people of the same age. He jumped out of his chair and exclaimed, "Wow!" Everyone around him looked at him, utterly perplexed. He glanced at the information window in front of him and thought, 2121, that was 4 years ago. He was in a classroom where the teacher was explaining some topic to the children, but due to his outburst, the teacher became very annoyed and shouted back at Een. He seemed to have a different opinion about the history of the towers. Een really understood it well. The teacher's name was Funk, 40 years old, single, naturally reserved, and also known to be irritable and petty, according to rumors. His soul ability measured 3.2 units, and his throwing accuracy was 93%. He threw the pen in Yin's direction angrily. Yilan caught it easily with one hand and wondered why he had traveled back in time for years. All the children around continued to look at him with expressions of complete bewilderment. He pondered it for a moment and immediately began to recount to the entire class that on November 11, 2011, four gigantic towers appeared out of nowhere, followed by a red rain that covered 3/4 of the world's land. The land touched by the red rain turned into a scorched earth, no longer suitable for human survival. At the same time, artificial satellites located in outer space also fell to Earth. On that day, the Earth became a forbidden zone for humanity's exploration, and the search for salvation from the outside. Subsequently, the survivors restored civilization and order, renaming the era after the disaster as the Era of the Towers. The teacher gritted his teeth and admitted that the answer was correct but allowed himself to suddenly shout with incredible fury while looking at him. He instructed him to answer the question instead of following the lesson plan he had prepared. He should stand up and leave the classroom to reflect on his behavior. Een left the office with the idea that the world would end in 4 years with 4 terrifying natural disasters appearing as bosses, escaping the final level of a game with overwhelming power, destroying everything around. The natural disasters were submission to hunger, war, and death, and the only ones capable of dealing with these natural disasters were the apostles, the elite of humanity summoned by the towers. They could enter the inner world created by the tower as if they were entering a game, completing various life and death missions to gain power beyond human abilities and become the Great Wall of humanity's defense. However, after the natural disasters displayed their overwhelming power, traitors began to appear among the apostles, submitting to the natural disasters and becoming their executioners, killing people. While he was lost in thought, a young man approached him and called him Zin. He asked what he was doing here. He looked at the newcomer incredulously and didn't say anything. This young man was Zil Y, and he asked him again if they were best friends. He gave him history lessons because best friends should help each other. He playfully smacked Yilin on the head with a notebook, and in response, Yilin gave him a scrutinizing look, recalling the gruesome murder of Molly and contemplating with a sinister gaze. Zio Yen distanced himself from Yilin and said one last thing. He should hurry and finish the work by evening because he would have to deliver it by morning. While saying these words, he thought that this person made others feel pathetic. At the end of the night, a storm formed over the city, and there was heavy rain. Yilin observed with hatred, getting wet in the rain, wondering what he could expect until tomorrow. This night might be his death. At some point later, in the Yang family's house, Yang proudly shouted, 180 kilograms of strength, 215 kilograms of strength, 200 kilograms of strength, 195 kilograms of strength. He was training with a boxing simulator, asserting that he was a true genius. Even if the professor were here, he couldn't withstand the force of his punch. Just then, all the lights in the house went out, and he became alert, looking around and asking what was happening. All the lights in his house had gone out. Had the electricity been cut off? At that moment, a system window appeared in front of his face, asking if he believed in God, with options for yes or no presented. He looked at the system window with a questioning expression and pondered it, but at that moment, he was alerted by some approaching sounds. He became startled, and behind him was Yilin, who brandished his sword and declared it as a notification of his death. Yen became very frightened, clutching his neck, trying to turn around carefully, and exclaimed, "Is he crazy? Why was he doing this to him?" Yilin responded with a question, asking why, for years later, he was posing the same question to him. How could he let him live without seeking revenge? After being reborn, he was not one of those people who waited for someone to do evil to them, and only then pay them back what they deserved. Ian fell to the ground and continued screaming while holding his throat in extreme distress. At this point, the system window reported the murder of an apostle candidate. An unregistered person or a transfer of status had been detected. Yilin looked at his movements with questioning eyes and stated that he believed he was dead. There were two ways to become an apostle, one of which was to increase your strength and agility and raise your soul attributes to 10, giving you a chance to be summoned by the tower. The second method available in this situation was to kill an apostle or apostle candidate with one's own hands, depriving them of their status. There was a lot of blood under Yang's unconscious body, and the system window reported a successful status transfer. He had to register in the Tower of Death registration area with ID 1010. At that moment, a chest appeared on the ground right in front of him, emitting a bright light. He received a system notification that a relic chest had been received. There were also 998 apostle candidates. He reached out for the chest and expressed his appreciation, as this would make him an apostle much faster than he could have done before. The system window notified him of a new notification. The chest had been successfully opened, and the hidden breath skill was obtained. Magical waves formed around Hein's body as he stopped and continued within the magic circle. The system window reported the active skill Hidden Breath was available, Class C, with a consumption of 2 points of spiritual energy, reducing the sense of presence by 40%. At the end of the skill's action, time was reversed by 300 seconds. The description stated that he could silently observe anything. An unknown candidate apostle module was detected, and the system window requested him to install it. A bright magic circle formed in front of Hein, and he extended his hand, thinking about the unknown module. Afterward, he shouted, "Download this," and the system window reported that the unknown module was being loaded. At that moment, a magical vortex hit the ground, making fragments fly in different directions. The system window reported that the unknown module had been successfully loaded. An innate skill tree opened up where he could edit, replace, and update his skills. Ian got up, looked around in surprise, and said, "A natural disaster module." He checked the skills panel and found out he had been defeated by the submission to natural disasters skill. An apostle could have a maximum of several skills, while natural disasters had their own skill tree. Each orb of light represented a skill, but why hadn't he noticed the existence of this module before? If the inner world created by the tower is considered a copy of a game, then the apostles must be considered as players, and as for the natural disasters, they are the final bosses. This happened because he had assumed the status of an apostle candidate, as he had re-established communication with the tower. While the tower activated the natural disasters module, the system window would report if the module was damaged or if the skill was initially destroyed and couldn't be used. Ian was very surprised by this and expressed his perplexity on his face, leading him to shout, "Is the module damaged? Can he really not use the skill?" He held his head and said with disappointment, "This means he won't be able to use the skills of the disasters. But with the skill tree, he won't have a limit on the number of available skills, and, most importantly, he can now edit and update his skills. He'll just need to replace the skills he received in the outside world with the skill orbs from the module." He imagined an incredibly strong natural disaster with bright red eyes and shouted with joy. Then suddenly, his cries of joy abruptly stopped, and he calmed down, beginning to reflect with a thoughtful look. He was very agitated. But why would he become a natural disaster? He just wanted to have power similar to them. He looked back at the system window's question, "Do you believe in God?" He answered yes, clicked the yes button, and said the tower was calling him. Aaron straightened his back and looked at the new system window that informed him that a path to the outside world was opening for him. The test mission for the apostle candidate would soon begin, ID 1010. He should prepare for this test. Suddenly, he started to pixelate and moved with the help of magical powers, shouting about inner peace. Some time later, he woke up on the passenger seat inside the plane. The flight attendant greeted all the passengers of Flight 444 over the loudspeaker. She was the senior flight attendant on this AI-assisted flight and would accompany them during the journey. Ian looked around cautiously and wondered if the test mission would take place on an airplane. He fastened his seatbelt, looked to the side, and thought with a calm expression on his face. Since the appearance of the tower, the sky had become a restricted zone for all of humanity. Suddenly, people began to appear around him in the airplane cabin, reacting with surprise to everything that was happening. Someone shouted in fear, "Where are we?" In the seats of the plane were Wang King, the president's secretary, Mabel, a retired senior programmer, and Gi, a convicted suicide terrorist. The flight attendant continued to inform them as they arrived. She explained that as they passed through the area of storm clouds over the sea, turbulence of varying degrees could occur in the fuselage, but no one would die, and they shouldn't panic. Following these words, the flight attendant posed a question. "All 5 of you can meet a tragic and exciting end." Before she could finish her next sentence, the plane began to plummet abruptly at an incredible speed. She shouted, "And the test begins for everyone. The main goal for test participants is to survive." The plane was flying through heavy clouds with lightning, pouring rain, and strong winds outside. The passengers were bewildered, and Ian couldn't help but think that this was a terribly familiar and ominous prologue. Everyone screamed in fear, seeking reassurance from their fellow passengers. "Hey, everyone, did you all hear that transmission? What's happening to us? Were we abducted while we were sleeping?" Ian was perplexed, gripping the seat back with both hands. At that moment, G's face turned pale with fear, and he spoke in a bewildered manner as sweat trickled down his face. "How is this possible? The plane hasn't been operational for 10 years. I've been working here for a long time and was already asleep when they signaled me. I'm not sure what's going on." Suddenly, G stood up and shouted without any fear, "All of us chose, yes, to get here, right?" He's correct. All the villains die painfully, but apparently, the heavens are still on our side. He laughed after these statements. King looked at him with a serious expression and said, "Men really can't be trusted in this life. They always scream when something goes wrong. But anyway, we should focus on our escape first." Ian took a closer look at King and realized that she was very calm for someone who had just entered the inner world for the first time. He leaned in to look at something and told the other passengers to check under their seats because there should be a first aid kit there. He retrieved the first aid kit and pondered how to reduce the difficulty of the beginner mission. The tower had prepared survival props for the test subjects. He opened the first aid kit and saw a system window indicating an unrated fruit knife with the description, "Small fruit knife resembling a fruit peeler knife." No idea who placed it in the survival box. He examined the knife and thought about the first aid kit, survival props prepared by the tower for the test subjects. The system window indicated an unrated old parachute bag with the description, "This is a feature of Flight 44, an aged parachute bag that hasn't been reviewed for many years." He looked at the items with perplexity and thought, an old parachute bag. It seemed that the survival luck depended on whether this parachute worked or not, because according to the unbreakable rules of the tower, the person who used this item would die. He didn't need it to escape since it was a trap. He imagined all the passengers on board fighting each other and realized that it was a trap that would make them start taking these items from each other and killing each other. Suddenly, Babel opened his first aid kit and shouted with incredible surprise, "It's really a container." How did he know? He has a life jacket and a bottle here. He picked up the bottle and examined it carefully with a questioning expression, wondering if it was a bottle of expired coconut milk. Ja spoke with a threatening look while holding some items, a life jacket and a sturdy helmet. "These idiots want me to land headfirst, don't they?" He was expressing his discontent with obscenities and shouted that there was absolutely nothing under his seat. Why wasn't there a container there? He knelt down and continued in panic. Ian noticed this and wondered why there was no container. This didn't make sense. Even if the props were maliciously hidden, the tower wouldn't stop the props. King grabbed his bag and said with a happy expression, "That's great. She's lucky to have a parachute." The other passengers were very angry at this fact, and the three of them looked at King with hatred at the same time. AI grabbed King by the neck and shouted that she should give her the parachute. He just wanted to survive. She dropped the bag and tried to breathe. At that moment, Ian came to his rescue, grabbing AI by the shirt and throwing her aside, which surprised her very much. She fell to the ground with a crash and lost her glasses. Her face hurt a lot due to the impact on the ground. She adjusted her glasses, turned around, and saw Jesse approaching King. He looked at the horizon with a calm expression and thought that this woman was very calm from the beginning. When she found out that she had a parachute in her bag, she immediately told everyone, deliberately provoking this fight and struggle, which was quite cruel to the other passengers. But what would she gain from this? At that moment, Ian approached AI, who had a threatening expression, and asked, "So he doesn't have a parachute?" Then he handed him the parachute bag. Kir accepted it in silence, looking at Ian with a confused expression. Ian reflected that the sooner he got rid of this problem, the better. G looked at him with a smile and asked, "He really wants to show that he's brave and good? Alright, he's going to get in the game." At that moment, the plane door opened, and he fell out with a smile of joy, shouting, "It's quite windy outside today." They had the last parachute on board, so they could fight calmly for it. Ian looked at him with a cynical smile and thought that it was the first time he had met someone who was willing to throw himself to his death with a smile. But there was no absolute dead end in this mission. Once there was no savior on board, he could only go to the cabin. He stopped in front of the cabin door and looked thoughtfully at it. Suddenly, something alerted him, and he saw a hand sticking out on the floor. He approached and saw the body of a person. This scared him very much, and he thought with fear, "Another person?" He thought about the other people on board and wondered how the transmission clearly stated that there were only 5 people on this flight, but now they had a 6th. Was there something else between them? With this pretext, he imagined a monster in his mind and looked threateningly into the distance. After some time, he found another container under another seat. He tried to open it, and the system window informed him that he had received a life jacket and a common safety hammer. The life jacket had no rating and was described as a snug and tight life jacket with high quality and wear resistance. Even if a corpse fell into the sea with this life jacket, it would float safely. The common safety hammer had no rating, and the description said that it was just a common safety hammer that could only be used to break windows or doors. The man looked at the body of the other passenger, who was lying on the floor with a pool of blood on his face. He wondered who had killed him and why. He thought about the other passengers on board. The man with glasses didn't have a container under his seat, and the woman was too calm for someone who was in the inner world for the first time. He suspected that one of them was the murderer. At that moment, he heard a commotion behind him. He turned around and saw King and Baba fighting. King was trying to protect his parachute bag, and Baba was demanding it from him. The man watched the fight in silence. He was starting to think that this test was more dangerous than he had thought. At that moment, he tossed the parachute aside, which hit an adjacent island, making her cry out from the impact. She then looked at Yin's face, grabbing his clothes, and said with an affectionate expression, "Brother, you should get your parachute. This is her only chance to escape." In turn, he wondered whether she would easily let go of her only chance to escape. If things didn't go as planned, there might be demons involved, and she was more likely to be the demon. He pushed her away, making her fly away from him with a questioning look on her face. He grabbed a magically glowing hammer and thought, "She has terrible acting skills." You can immediately see that she wants to make them fight and kill each other for a useless parachute. She fell at his feet, expressing her desperation. After these words, he knocked on the door with his hammer, thinking that this is indeed an unusual hammer. The hammer hit the door, breaking it into several pieces, and he started to make his way inside. The king saw this and called out to him, saying, "Brother, you're going the wrong way." He entered the cabin, and the flight attendant informed him that the apostolic candidate number 939 had died, and there were 7 minutes left until the Flight 444 accident. He saw the deceased pilot with blood on his face, and a fire had ignited at the front of the plane. Ian looked around, found a backpack hanging in the room behind the pilot, and wondered if the backpack with a parachute was just a trap. But this was for an escape. The system window said, "New backpack with parachute, unrated, special backpack with parachute from Flight 444's captain. Guaranteed quality, 100% parachute opening probability. The captain's life safety must be ensured." He received a new backpack with a parachute. At this moment, the old Biba was already standing by the open plane door, fully prepared to jump from the plane with a parachute backpack on his back. He turned toward the passengers and proudly shouted about his achievements. She noticed that the older man wasn't compromising the clues, being old enough to face it. He was that kind of person. He advanced towards the abyss, and someone asked him a question loudly. Ignoring the death warnings in the transmission, Ian, who questioned him, asked him in response who he believed had died. The nanny, finally, looked at him perplexed, unable to answer. However, suddenly, he realized something. He thought about the fact that the boy who had already parachuted was dead. There was something wrong with the old parachute. He closed the plane doors, feeling a growing terror. He rubbed the back of his head and remained sitting on the floor after the attack, claiming that his head hurt too much. He cursed the reckless one. Suddenly, he stood up, looked around, and spotted a backpack with a parachute on the nanny's back, surprising him. Loudly, he exclaimed, perplexed, that the nanny was wearing a parachute. She looked at him in astonishment, unable to answer. However, suddenly, realized something. She thought that the boy who had already parachuted was dead. There was something wrong with the old parachute. Bobo shouted for him not to approach. He offered him the parachute, approaching with a furious expression. He shouted for him to hand it over as soon as possible. Jumping over Bobo, the plane door opened, and both fell into an unknown space. During the flight, he laughed loudly in the face of the old Bobo and then shouted for a parachute. Finally, he grabbed a parachute, holding a parachute backpack in his hands. Bobo shouted back, saying that he was a terrible person and that he didn't want to die on the plane. Ellen was approached by King, who touched her shoulder and said with a fake smile that he thought he found a safe parachute. He suggested she let the man take her with him. He was alert to her graceful appearance and replied that it wasn't her who killed a test subject in the first grade and then stole that glasses-wearing kid's box. At the same time, he turned to her and grabbed her by the neck, stating that if anyone suspected an extra person among them, only the glasses-wearing man would be suspected. He threw her to the ground, sitting on her, restraining her, and said that he had carefully prepared 2 layers of safety net. Unfortunately, it was on much higher levels than hers. She was normally calm for someone who had entered the inner world for the first time, and her desire to survive was deep. She responded with indifference that it wasn't bad that the newcomer didn't seem to notice her, but it seemed like she should have eliminated him at the beginning of the mission. At the moment he shifted to the side, she shouted at him. In fact, she was considering fleeing from there. However, she wrapped her magical power around him and declared that she had captured him. She transformed into a sinister monster, with long hair and tongue, telling him as she pressed against his body that she would devour him slowly, piece by piece. He should have tried to scream as loudly as possible, as she desired to savor this process. The flight attendant reported that apostolic candidates number 897 1.2 were killed. Ian expressed hatred on her face, claiming that she was an undead. According to rumors, they were apostles who died in the inner world, restless souls trapped in the tower full of resentment, becoming undead specialized in obstructing the path of apostles and hunting them. At this moment, he found himself in an unknown space among the magical shadows that twisted around. The system window notified the concealment of his breath, reducing the sense of his presence by 40%. Suddenly, King looked around in surprise, questioning where he was. He was right in front of her, magical light shining in his eyes, asking her a question while she asserted that he would escape from there. She responded, shouting that no, and he was right in front of her. At that moment, Len attacked abruptly, asking with which eye she saw that he was thinking of escaping. Wielding a dagger in her hand, she tried to cut his throat. He dodged and spoke with a sinister look, surprised by the newcomer's power but reminding him that she used to be an apostle. He wasn't the only one with these abilities. She swung her magical powers towards him, trying to protect herself from the attack while gritting her teeth in anger. She confidently shouted with full confidence in her abilities. Compared to the newcomer's skill, she tempered every muscle and bone in her body, meaning she had an immortal body. He stood astonished in a defensive posture, realizing that he didn't want to take risks but would have to. With this thought in mind, he jumped from the ground and advanced toward her with incredible force, swinging his dagger in front of her face and sending a beam of bright magical light. She reacted with surprise, asking if it was a skill. So, he had the second skill all along. The system window indicated that it was a vibration tip, and continuous use of vibration caused a resonance that destroyed the original structure of the object. King tried to protect himself from the attack with his hands, expressing hatred as he claimed that it was impossible. As a newly entered beginner in the inner world, he possessed two abilities simultaneously. He persisted in the fight and spoke to her in a calm tone, claiming that all of this happened because he created her. During the attack, he pondered while threatening her with a knife, losing the abilities gained in the tower due to Rebirth. However, the combat skills he developed over hundreds of battles were deeply engraved in his memory. King began to shout back at him, accusing him of creating an ability to deceive her shamelessly. However, she showed indifference as her immortal body resisted all attacks, making them seem like tickles. He continued to stare at her with a threatening expression. Asking if he was really just enjoying tickling her, she stuck out her tongue and challenged him to keep trying and make her feel some pain. After a while, he stopped, trying to catch his breath, watching his dagger fall apart. King, curious, abruptly questioned the reason for his interruption. She belittled him, considering him an idiot who could only talk with his own tongue. Then, she began to attack him furiously, expressing her frustration and how useless he was. He looked at her confidently and smiled, asking something she hadn't noticed yet. His body was full of cracks. He directed his strength towards her, smiling as his body disintegrated into small pieces. She, perplexed and scared, questioned how this was possible, as she had an immortal body. He smiled and explained that if she really had an immortal body, she wouldn't have turned into an undead. His body dissolved completely, leaving only the head on the ground. He concluded by stating that they were just his toys, and one day he would die while she awaited him inside. He crushed the head under his foot, without time to hear more. The system window reported that a level undead was destroyed, and 800 chaos points were obtained. The flight attendant announced that Flight 444 was 3 minutes away from crashing. Ian opened the plane doors, questioning the meaning of chaos points. Although she had faced undead before, she had never heard or seen anything like this. Still pondering the matter, she jumped from the plane, which continued to engulf in flames, and collided with the water. The system reports that Apostle Candidate 1010 has completed the main task, surviving the challenge. The approval score was calculated based on an attribute increase of 0.8. Based on the data from Apostle 1010, the spatial pocket communication function has been unlocked, obtaining the status of a level 1 apostle. The death points calculation includes a difficulty bonus, a random reward of 5%, and a score bonus of 25%. 13 death points were received, along with the reward of a rescue hammer. Additionally, a new ability, Earthquake, has been acquired. Its current level is 4, and the host's body has entered recovery mode, completing recovery and returning after some time spent in the unknown space. The scene shifted to Zill's house, where several police cars were parked in front, with emergency lights flashing. A man held a folder of documents and reported that the deceased person was Zio, an 18-year-old man, a student in Class 3 at Kington High School, with a total of 10 admission attribute points. He turned to the girl standing in front of him, identified as Guni, the leader of the joint inspection team. The man praised her skills, and she turned pale. Gu, the chief, announced that the deceased lived alone, based on the preliminary investigation. Bloodstains had already spread across the body, and the estimated time of death was from 7 p.m. until dawn. No signs of struggle or body dragging were found, and the throat was cut with a single knife stroke. A man named Su, a member of the Joint Inspection Squad, suggested that the killer was professional and called for a thorough search of every corner. While looking at the documents, Su stated that the killer probably came prepared to kill, and the team should carefully look for clues. His subordinates confirmed the order. Gu approached In, asking for her full name. She replied that her name was In. When questioned about her gender, he was surprised, momentarily perplexed, and responded with a confused expression that it was difficult to distinguish a man from a woman at this age. Gu requested that he stop talking nonsense and answer the question. As he uttered these words, she reflected that Zy Young was the only son of the president of Ongjungo Medical Equipment, not a simple person. He stepped back, giving a penetrating feeling. She asked him a question seriously, and he avoided looking into her eyes, conscious of what had happened. He pointed his finger in the direction of the other officer, indicating that all the questions had already been asked by that person. The officer ran to Su with the documents, informing Supervisor Gu that all statements had been recorded. The deceased did not attend school today, and, due to a good relationship with the deceased, the principal requested a visit. His personality usually doesn't cause trouble since his parents work abroad all year round, rarely being at home. This creates a similar situation to that of the deceased. Due to these circumstances, they became friends to the point of knowing each other's house entry passwords. After justifying himself, he hastily asked to leave. She examined the documents more carefully, not responding immediately. However, the officer approached him and stated that, although he could leave, the killer was dangerous and professional. He asked him to report if he remembered anything that could be a clue to the killer's identity. In thought about being cautious of video surveillance before leaving. The voluntary enrollment process aims to better understand the dynamics of the Joint Inspection Unit. As for the abandoned body of Ziyu Yen, he considers it a distraction. In 4 years, the world will experience significant changes, leading to the end of the world and the wandering of corpses through the streets. The monsters hiding in the darkness will turn into natural disasters, starting to kill their own kind. At that moment, he will accelerate and send all these traitors to the next world, one by one. After some time, In is also at home, and a voice informs her that the current date is July 9, 22121. This is Indices, a domestic artificial intelligence, and it reveals that Ian is dead, ensuring her safety. Ian then mentions that he will come soon. She asks Indices to make coffee and add half a gram of salt, which the artificial intelligence agrees to do. Ian comments on the collapse of satellites and the disappearance of the wireless networks that covered the world, replaced by Celestial Web number 1. Now, the internet and mail are connected to this web, formed by expansive underground cables. Ian types the password on her phone, being notified that the first and second level passwords have been entered correctly. The third level password is an audio password, and she must say it above 80 dB. The password is a unique phrase, not an entity, and must be said as quickly as possible, otherwise, it will be permanently blacklisted by the caller. The countdown begins, and Lin utters the phrase that should be the password. However, the voice informs that it was at 56 dB, indicating an incorrect and non-self-sufficient entry. He is instructed to repeat the password after the beep, and Ian expresses his embarrassment out loud, questioning what could be more embarrassing than this. He reiterates that he is a unique being, not an entity. The voice confirms that the entry was successfully completed. Shortly after, Molly asks who Ian is, and he thinks that he can finally hear her voice again. Ian mentions that, in this era, she still doesn't know him. A minute later, Molly challenges him to prove it, and Lin calls her mowing. She says out loud that this is an embarrassing childhood nickname her late grandmother gave her, something she never revealed to anyone. Ian questions if she really believed it, and Molly loudly asserts that he must immediately say his address. He provides the address, and she says she will be there in 22 hours. They will take this opportunity to assess their statuses and characteristics. Ian invokes the system's apostle panel, and the system windows appear before him. He notices something strange when he sees that luck and charisma, attributes considered unchangeable, are decreasing instead of increasing. Ian asks why this is happening, considering that he completed the mission. He emphasizes that the charisma attribute is not related to appearance, and luck has always been unpredictable. The system notifies that the skill Mental Shock has a B rating, with a minus sign, consuming 200 spiritual power points. The skill's effect causes stun on a single target within a radius of 200 meters. In a dazed state, the skill's effectiveness directly depends on the psychic parameter of the target's will. The skill description is user-friendly. Ian is transported to another space with the skill tree and realizes that the created skills are not displayed on the panel. The system explains that the disaster module recognized the skills available for enhancement. Ian agrees to replace the skill from the damaged module and then enhance it. The system informs that 500 chaos points were used, still leaving 500 points. The improvement of the breath-hiding skill has been upgraded to the shadow skill. Island now understands why he didn't receive chaos points for eliminating undead in his previous life. It was necessary to enhance his skills in the disaster module. After the enhancement, the reduction in the sense of presence increased to 70%. If the skill were to be upgraded again, it would be like activating ghost mode. The system notifies that the shadow skill has a 1-star rating, consuming 3 spiritual energy points per second. The effect of staying behind the target or hiding in the shadows can reduce the sense of presence by up to 70%. The skill description is user-friendly. Dine, delighted, asks to enhance the shadow skill. The system warns that there are not enough chaos points for that. Island suggests then enhancing the mental shock, but the system informs that there are not enough points for that either. Jilin considers that if the chaos points are not enough, he will need to earn them. The important thing is that he discovered that after the enhancement, the next one is available. He notices a skill fragment in front of him and realizes there are other fragments. Returning to the real world, he sits on the sofa determined to collect 3 skill fragments to create something new in the vast skill tree of the disaster module. He observes that his phone has fallen, is broken, and considers that his luck is decreasing. At that moment, someone knocks on his door. He checks the phone and comments that the person is 2 minutes late. Upon opening the door, she immediately advances, kicking him, stating that he must die. Ian responds that it seems like she has developed the habit of punching people in the face. She threatens to stomp him to death if he calls her that name again. Ellen offers her a cup of drink, asking why she is so upset over just a childhood nickname. He expresses his confidence in her and compliments her glasses, while the system completes the analysis of the drink, indicating that it is safe for consumption and contains small insect bombs ready to explode at any moment. Ian jokes, asking if she intends to blow up his house if something goes wrong. Molly savors her coffee and comments that he doesn't even need to make an effort to please her. In addition to discovering her encrypted phone number, the stranger has also managed to reveal a specific nickname. How can a lady appear so unprepared in a meeting? After a sip from the cup, she is surprised and asks if he knows the taste of her favorite coffee. Molly wonders if this is an accident because during their last call, he mentioned that they already knew each other. Perhaps she misunderstood. Curious, she asks who he is and if he hasn't come back from the future. She considers the possibility of him being a time traveler, which would make him a valuable object for study. Ian recalls that apostles are not allowed to reveal the secrets of the Tower of Inner Worlds to ordinary people, under the penalty of terrible punishments. How could he explain it to her? He approaches and reveals that he will share a secret with her, asking her to keep it a secret. Molly, alarmed, is about to kick him, but he asks her to keep her distance. It turns out he is an angel who protects her all the time, and he has only appeared now to ask for something in return. Molly thinks he just wants to deceive her, believing that she is just a research subject. Ian questions if she doesn't believe him, and she replies that only a fool would. In 2121, he is talking about time travel from 2021. Ian disappears, surprising Molly. She notes that her analysis glasses do not detect biometric waves, indicating that he vanished. The system warns that the internal world channel is open, and Apostle 1010, on the 4th level, should cease. Ian considers that the 4th level is not so much a level but rather an indicator of his current strength rating by the tower. Based on the overall rating, the tower sends an apostle to the corresponding floor of the inner world. The system informs that he has already reached the 4th floor, a misty mountain inhabited by humans and demons. 5 young demon hunters have come there, bringing light to the misty mountain. The legend of the ghostly mist mountain begins, with the main task of defeating the demon leader. In case of failure, there will be complete destruction. The warning is clear, it's dark here, and he must keep the doors closed. Ian comments that the plot summary is still fascinating. A young girl emerges from the forest and warns Ian about the presence of a ghost, urging him to run. Ian follows the girl, questioning if this involves any supernatural creature. He ponders the possibility of gaining chaos points by defeating spirits and ghosts. The girl warns about a dangerous path where a people-devouring ghost resides. Ian inquires why the girl is following him, and she reveals that the ghost in question devoured her father. The girl senses the ghost approaching them, accusing Ian of using her as a human shield. Ian uses his shadow ability to reduce his presence and questions the girl about her humanity, insinuating that she lied about her father. The girl turns around and notices that Ian has disappeared, only for him to reappear behind the monster. Ian asks if the monster is not attacking him, while stabbing it in the back, stating that they are on the same side. A small stone pillar indicates Shadow Village. Simultaneously, Li Chen, Wani, and Qingji walk through the forest, surprised by the absence of a 5th ghost hunter. The system warns that Apostle 1010 has been sent to incorrect coordinates, disconnecting him from the main plot. The monster heals from Yin's attack, revealing that Apostle 1010 is alive. Jinan dodges the monster's attacks, puzzled by the wrong coordinates. He understands that, due to extreme bad luck, he ended up in a different location. The system informs that the monster uses a stunning ability. The route to Apostle 1010 is redrawn, indicating the need to go to the village on the west side to learn ghost hunting skills. Due to the incorrect coordinates, Ian did not acquire these skills, and the system asks him to return to the main story. Ian, irritated, questions if he can't kill the ghost. He expresses disbelief and promises to try all possible ways to defeat it, ignoring the system's request to return to the main story. He continues to beat the ghost, questioning the lack of brain control in the monster's actions and suggesting the possibility that the heart is not a weak point, given the ghost's resistance.